No chance of advancement, no respect, and an ever-present threat of violent death. Welcome to life as a court jester in medieval France, where your survival depends entirely on making the right person laugh at exactly the right time. The year is 1387. Xavier Landon, known professionally as Jingle Bells, for the tiny bells sewn onto his motley outfit, has been the royal jester at the French court for 7 years. This morning, he stares at his reflection in a murky puddle of what he hopes is water in the castle courtyard. The red and yellow patches of his costume are faded, and the pointed hat with donkey ears sags pathetically to one side. Still, he forces himself to practice his widest grin. "You there, fool! Come entertain us!" Xavier sighs. Being summoned like a dog never gets easier, but he immediately springs into an exaggerated bow, bells jingling. "As you wish, my lord." Here's the first brutal truth about being a court jester. You were never off duty. Unlike the royal cooks who could escape to their quarters after dinner, or the stable hands who at least had predictable working hours, jesters were perpetual entertainment machines. Any nobleman could demand a performance at any time, day or night. Want to summon a sleep-deprived jester at 3 a.m. because you're bored? Absolutely your royal prerogative. Make the Duke laugh, or it's the dungeons for you, whispers a page as Xavier enters the great hall. Another delightful aspect of jester life. Consequences for bombing a performance went well beyond getting a bad review. Unlike modern comedians who might face an awkward silence after a failed joke, medieval jesters could face actual torture for failing to amuse. The dungeons beneath the royal palace weren't metaphorical. They were damp, rat-infested hellholes where many a jester had spent time contemplating better punchlines. Xavier spots Duke Charles, a notoriously humorless man whose jowls only shake with laughter when someone else is suffering. "Fantastic. My Lord Duke." Xavier cartwheels forward, nearly knocking over a servant. "They say your new hunting dogs are so loyal. They refuse to chase anything but compliments." Silence. Xavier sweats beneath his motley. The Duke's eyebrow twitches dangerously. "Much like your tax collectors," Xavier continues desperately, "who are so persistent they'd pursue a peasant into the afterlife for an unpaid copper." The Duke's face cracks into a reluctant smile, then a hearty laugh. "True enough, jester. True enough." Xavier exhales. Another day without the dungeons. Contrary to popular belief, court jesters weren't just silly entertainers. They were required to be exceptionally intelligent, with mastery of multiple skills. The historical record shows that most successful jesters were accomplished musicians, acrobats, mimics, storytellers, and jugglers. They needed to speak multiple languages, understand politics, and possess encyclopedic knowledge of noble families and their scandals, all while appearing delightfully simple. That evening, Xavier sits cross-legged on his pallet in the small storage room he calls home. His quarters are directly adjacent to the kitchen, ensuring he's awoken daily by the clatter of pots at dawn. While nobles slept on feather beds in private chambers, jesters typically received accommodations slightly better than the servants, which is to say, still absolutely terrible. He nurses his aching joints with a grimace. At 35, Xavier is ancient for a jester. The constant acrobatics, falls, and physical comedy have ravaged his body. His knees crack like kindling when he stands, his back spasms regularly, and his right shoulder dislocates with alarming frequency. Medieval healthcare consisted primarily of bloodletting and prayers, neither of which did much for repetitive stress injuries. There's a pounding on his door. "The Queen requests your presence immediately." Speaking of stress, Queen Nadine Jourdain is hosting ladies from neighboring kingdoms, and Xavier knows what's expected. Court jesters were walking diplomatic tools, often used to deliver insults disguised as jokes that nobles couldn't say directly. Need to mock a visiting dignitary's unfashionable attire or suspicious military movements without causing a war. Have your jester do it. The nobility got all the satisfaction of the insult with none of the accountability. Make a jest about the Burgundian countess's new headdress. The queen whispers as Xavier approaches. It's ridiculous, and she needs to know it without my having to say so. Xavier bows low. As you command, your majesty. The Countess of Burgundy sits rigidly at the queen's table, sporting a headdress roughly the size and shape of a ship's sail, adorned with enough pearls to sink said ship. Ladies, what an honor! Xavier prances forward. I see the Countess has come prepared for any change in weather with that headdress. A sudden gust could carry you all the way back to Burgundy. The French ladies titter. The Countess's face darkens. Xavier continues, tossing 3 apples in a skilled juggling pattern. They say fashion travels, but in your case, Countess, it seems to have arrived with its own transportation. Laughter erupts, and even the Countess manages a tight smile, knowing that maintaining diplomatic relations requires pretending to enjoy being the butt of the joke. Xavier performs for another hour before being dismissed. On his way out, the Countess's guard accidentally steps on his foot, grinding down with armored weight. Xavier maintains his jester's grin through the excruciating pain. Hazards of the profession. One of the cruelest ironies of jester life was that while they had the rare privilege of speaking truth to power through humor, they had absolutely no power themselves. Historical records reveal that court jesters occupied a bizarre social position. They could mock kings to their faces, something no one else dared do, yet were considered less valuable than the royal hunting dogs. The next morning, Xavier is summoned to the king's private chambers, which is never a good sign. King Philippe IV is in a dangerous mood. His latest military campaign is failing, taxes are unpopular, and his mistress has taken ill. He needs someone to blame. Entertain me, fool, he growls. And mind your words carefully. Here lies perhaps the most terrifying aspect of jester life. They were expected to criticize the powerful through humor, yet could be executed for the very same criticism if delivered with the wrong timing or tone. Historical records show that several French court jesters were executed for jokes that went too far, including one unfortunate fellow who mocked a king's baldness only to find himself lacking a head the next morning. Xavier performs a series of tumbles, tells light-hearted stories, and plays a merry tune on his lute. The king remains stone-faced. Perhaps your majesty would enjoy my impression of the English ambassador? Xavier suggests carefully. What I would enjoy, the king says slowly, is your thoughts on my new tax plan. This is the dreaded jester trap. The king wants Xavier to criticize the tax, then plans to punish him for the criticism. If Xavier refuses to joke about it, he'll be punished for being unfunny. There is no winning move. The new tax plan. Xavier affects an exaggerated thinking pose. It's much like your majesty's codpiece, impressively large, causing discomfort to those affected, and ultimately designed to protect something precious. A terrible silence falls. Then, miraculously, the king bursts into laughter. Impudent fool! You've cheered me. Take this. He tosses a small coin which Xavier catches with practiced ease. Payment for jesters was entirely at their master's whim. There were no salaries, no contracts, no guarantees. Some days brought generous rewards for a particularly clever joke. Others brought nothing but a cuff to the ear. While nobility dined on elaborate feasts, historical records show jesters often ate the equivalent of medieval fast food. Whatever scraps could be snagged from the kitchen. On special occasions, they might be permitted to eat at the lower tables during banquets, but never with the nobility. That evening, during a grand banquet, Xavier performs his most popular routine, mimicking various court members when they're drunk. The nobles roar with laughter as he captures the Chancellor's distinctive snorting laugh and the Duchess of Orleans' habit of speaking exclusively in hunting metaphors after too much wine. What the laughing nobles don't realize is that Xavier's performing with 3 broken ribs. courtesy of a baron who didn't appreciate being mimicked the previous week. Pain is a constant companion in the jester profession. The physical comedy, falls, and playful abuse from nobles ensured that most jesters lived with chronic injuries. Medieval medical care being what it was, horrific, these injuries went largely untreated. "Do the king next," someone shouts. The room falls silent. Mimicking the king is forbidden. Everyone knows this. "I couldn't possibly," Xavier demurs. "My talents fall far short of capturing His Majesty's magnificence." "I command it," comes the king's voice from the high table. It's another trap. If Xavier refuses a direct command, he'll be punished. If he does a poor imitation, he'll be punished for being unfunny. If he does too good an imitation, he'll be punished for mockery. Xavier takes a deep breath and launches into the safest possible imitation, portraying the king as more regal, more decisive, and more impressive than he actually is. He mimics the king's tendency to stroke his beard when making proclamations but exaggerates the wisdom of those proclamations. The court laughs appreciatively, and the king appears pleased by this flattering portrayal. Crisis averted. Later that night, exhausted and sore, Xavier collapses onto his pallet. Tomorrow brings a performance for the Spanish ambassador, who reportedly had his last court jester's tongue removed for a joke about Spanish horses. The day after, he's expected to entertain the king's notoriously violent youngest son, who enjoys playfully throwing daggers at jesters to test their reflexes. Such was life for the medieval court jester, walking a daily tightrope over a pit of painful consequences, with no safety net beyond their own wit. The final, bitter irony of jester life? Despite being among the most educated and quick-witted people at court, jesters rarely received recognition for their intelligence. Their wisdom was disguised as foolishness, their observations as mere jests. Historical records show that while some jesters became famous, their legacy was that of amusing characters rather than the shrewd political operators and skilled performers they actually were. Xavier finally drifts off to sleep, bells jingling softly as he shifts on his uncomfortable bed. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, new dangers, and new jokes. Because in medieval France, the show always went on, especially when you were dressed like a human Christmas tree with bells on. After all, the only thing worse than being a court jester was not being one anymore. At least the living ones could still tell jokes. The dead ones became the punchline.